serious, what are some crazy things scientists used to believe? One of the best examples would be Sigmund Freud's when it came to a scientist. Although some might consider him to be a philosopher. Some things Freud thought include: all women had penises, envy, and that all males were jealous of each other's penis, which caused society to function the way it did. Cocaine would help cure many physical and mental illnesses. Freud did correctly acknowledge its use as a local anesthetic though. Close bracket. Dreams solely function as wish fulfillments that help keep a person sleeping. The people don't remember their childhood well because they are trying to repress memories of molestation. And to say that such a thing never happened to you would only further prove his theory, as you wouldn't remember it. All in all, Freud was a special case who believed many things. And it was unable to disprove many of his ideas due to the way they were worded. A German man invented a new kind of optics based on the idea that the entire universe was concave, with the Earth forming a sphere around the rest of the universe. He invented all kinds of equations and whatnot based on this assumption, and he achieved quite a lot of respect and fanfare. This resulted in the German Imperial Navy attempting to shell France by sailing to the North Sea and firing straight up. Results were inconclusive. Mercury could be used as a disinfectant, a cure for syphilis, and a pill for immortality. http n Wikipedia. Org wiki Mercury %28 element %29 historic uses. Mercury, I, chloride, also known as calomel or mercurous chloride, has been used in traditional medicine as a diuretic, topical disinfectant, and laxative. Mercury, II, chloride, also known as mercuric chloride or corrosive sublimate, was once used to treat syphilis, along with other mercury compounds. Although it is so toxic that sometimes the symptoms of its toxicity were confused with those of the syphilis it was believed to treat. Double quote. Isaac Newton was a huge believer in alchemy, the now discredited science of trying to transmute base metals into more noble metals. He apparently spent a lot of time on the subject. From his journal, we found out that he invested significantly more time into alchemy than into his physics studies. To be fair, science as we define it now didn't exactly exist, which is why the Principia has natural philosophy as part of the subtitle. And out of alchemy rose some of the first principles and ideas of chemistry, just with less of our ideas of magic. I'm sure some of it totally blew people's minds at first. Since he was a natural philosopher though, my impression is that it was a generalized study of nature, rather than the specialization that is viewed as normal now. So from his standpoint I don't think he was crazy, but merely pursuing other avenues of gaining knowledge of how the world works in the best manner available to him. Nothing that weighs more than a man will be able to fly. One of the Wright brothers actually flat out said no flying machine will ever be capable of crossing the ocean. It's one of my favorite quotes. Always reminds that there is so much we could be extremely wrong about, given the state of internal combustion engines in the 1900s. It's not a surprising conclusion. My lawnmower has more horsepower than the 1903 Wright Flyer, and my engine is only a single cylinder and air cooled. Galen, the father of modern medicine, taught some batshit misogyny. He believed women's wombs were naturally cold, so men must fill wombs with sperm to warm them. Also, women cannot get pregnant unless they orgasm. This is why there were very few convicted rapes in the Middle Ages. If there's no baby, there's no evidence. If there is a baby, the woman wanted it and it's not a rape. This nonsense was actually the basis for English law. Basically medical science was 10 shades of messed up. And if you think that's bad, hysteria began as a theory that the womb was a free floating object, and floated around the woman's body messing up her program. It was called the wandering womb theory and remained popular for 1,500 years. http n Wikipedia. Org wiki wandering womb. That fire was the result of an elemental material called phlogiston. Basically that fire belongs on the scientific list of elements. I should mention this was before the periodic table was a thing. Similarly they used to believe cold was a substance. Like if you left a pot of water out overnight it absorbed cold particles and turned to ice. There's so many, but I'll leave these two for now. Astronomer here. One of my favorites was that for a while people saw Mercury's orbit was not moving perfectly as classical mechanics predicted. And they suggested that this was due to a planet between Mercury and the Sun, named Vulcan. http n Wikipedia org wiki Vulcan, hypothetical planet. This actually was a pretty reasonable idea at the time. Uranus's discovery astounded everyone as no one thought there were other planets. But from its orbit they saw there was still another big planet beyond. And it was calculated so perfectly via mathematics that Neptune was discovered exactly where it was predicted a night or two after the theorists worked it out. Further, it was really hard to search for Vulcan because it would be even closer to the Sun than Mercury. So it was conceivable that it just happened to evade detection. Then when Einstein came out with relativity, it turns out the effects of relativity explain exactly the differences you observe in Mercury's orbit. Allegedly, when Einstein was told this, he was so excited he couldn't sleep that night. But all around, I think Vulcan is a great example of how science works. You do the best you can with the information you have, trying to figure out a solution until someone finds a better idea to match the data. Until 1,668 people, educated people, thought that flies came about through spontaneous generation. Even though I think the average person should hear that and think to themselves, no, that is dumb. Flies clearly are born from eggs or some similar non-magical way having babies. Just because Aristotle said it, it must be true. Then Francesco Redi came on the scene and declared the whole mess to be idiotic and set people straight. It's not that crazy. If you leave food out, it does really look like flies have spontaneously generated on it. You can't see their eggs or where the eggs came from. The same with disease. You can't see a wound getting infected, it just gradually happens. I think spontaneous generation was a very fair theory based on the evidence of the time. Scientists have been trying forever to convince people that the foreskin brings only evil and problems. Throughout history they have incorrectly claimed about circumcision prevents harmful evil masturbation, that it should be performed without anesthetic as the brief pain attending the operation will have a salutary effect upon the mind, especially if it be connected with the idea of punishment. F-king sickening. Circumcision was also pushed as a cure for many other fad ailments of the day, including syphilis, tuberculosis, night terrors, even bedwetting. Additionally, falsely reported to be a cure for cancer. Nowadays circumcision cures HIV, gives you protection from STIs and UTIs. Each and every one of these claims is absolute horseshit. The fact that many Americans still believe the above quackery is absurd, but not surprising. http www History of circumcision. Netindex. PHP. Option equals content and task equals view and id equals 31. Modern science is founded on the scientific method, not on what a community of scientists believes as a whole. Taking the data we possess and drawing conclusions means that, for subjects with less data, there will be a wider margin for error. Anything erroneous that scientists used to believe is either explained by the fact that we admitted that we didn't have all the data in the first place and were merely making our most educated guess, or it is archaic, outdated science. The homunculus. Scientists and doctors used to believe that every sperm held a microscopic but fully formed human. They believed at conception this tiny person essentially hatched from the sperm, and all of the pregnancy was just the homunculus growing to full size. Glad it isn't true. Would make guys masturbating very disturbing. Millions of living, fully formed people being discarded and dying. Every day would be a genocide. That babies and children don't feel pain the same way as adults and would therefore be operated on with no painkillers. And this was going on up until the 1980s. The guy who suggested washing your hands as a surgeon was ridiculed to the point of a mental breakdown, then beaten to death in the asylum. Today Semmelweis is considered one of the fathers of the field of epidemiology, but at the time he was indeed ridiculed. Despite overwhelming statistical evidence in his favor, It should be noted that he had no idea that the fever was caused by a living microorganism. He assumed it was a poison that spread by touch. His hand washing policies were meant to wash away the toxin, but happened to kill the bacteria in question. This was decades before Louis Pasteur discovered the bacteria responsible. The bee field. Physicists used to not understand how the bumblebee was able to achieve lift with such tiny wings and such a huge body. So they postulated that the bees may be producing a bee field from a special gland in them which altered how fluid dynamics worked in a localized region around them. Turns out that bumblebees are just crazy jacked. Even Nobel Prize winning scientists can hold some pretty loony beliefs outside their field of expertise. The beauty of science, though, is that consensus rests on evidence and not force of personality. The writing of Isaac Newton in his later years was pretty bizarre. Fred Hoyle had some pretty out there ideas about how life on Earth originate, etc. Scientists kick around all sorts of ideas that can seem strange, but sometimes this kind of speculation can lead to exciting results. Mostly, though, research is a lot more orderly and linear. The AAAS guidelines on experts essentially says the opinion of a scientist commenting on a phenomena outside their specialty carries the same weight as the opinion of Joe Blow on the street. Tongue map. The idea that different sections of your tongue react to different tastes. It's wrong. But that doesn't stop many schools still teaching it, and it's possible to see tongue map posters in science classes around the world. Yeep. I remember being taught the bitter region, salty region, sweet region, etc. I remember trying to redirect whatever food I was eating to its appropriate region of the tongue for maximum flavor, but never found a difference. Or if I was eating something like a warhead or something really salty like that, I'd try to relocate it over the sweet region to counteract the effect, to no avail. Descartes believed the soul resided in the pineal gland and steered the brain around like it was sitting on a horse. This belief is reflected in some of the anatomical terms. The habenula is the major connection between the pineal and the brain, and it comes from the Latin meaning horse rein. Double quote. Regarding mental illness. The illness was a part of the body and was believed there was a source it came from. Often in women. They would remove the ovaries, spleen, and teeth. I've always thought that was super crazy. Often crazy is just crazy in hindsight. Sun goes round the earth? Looks like that to me. Phlogiston comes out of stuff it is burns? Watch coal or wood burning. You can see it. The heart is the seat of intelligence? That's where I react to things. Spontaneous creation of life? Put out some dead meat and you magically get maggots. They tried, and a lot of things we understand as true these days are not obvious. I'm probably late to the party, but organic chemists used to wash their hands with benzene, highly carcinogenic. And not the may cause cancer in the state of California kind, like actually will give you cancer. Anyway, since it's one of the best organic solvents, researchers were like, hey, we could use this to get all the other nasty shit off our hands. Since we don't wear gloves, a good number of them ended up getting skin cancer. Leonardo da Vinci believed that if a boy was riding a horse and bounced on the saddle at just the right angle, his penis would invert itself to become a sheath inside his body, thus turning him into a girl. Freud believed that since masturbation for boys took greater technical skill, they were naturally oriented toward mastery, which explained why boys were better at math, business, science, etc. Granted, Freud only observed masturbation in very young girls, which primarily consisted of rubbing themselves or rocking against things. But still, Freud did not actually make a career of watching children masturbate. He extrapolated from his own understanding of genitalia and parents' observations. Scientists also used to believe that contained on semen were perfectly formed human beings. The first man to observe sperm believed he would see tiny people and that a woman was literally just an incubator. This means that inside one man's semen you could have a bunch of fully formed men that had their own testicles full of entirely formed men with their own testicles full of men ad infinitum. The phrase blowing smoke up his ass actually comes from a medical practice. http://n. Wikipedia. Org wiki tobacco smoke enema. In the late 1700s there were emergency tobacco smoke enema kits all along the Thames that were thought to be effective at reviving drowning victims. It involved a bellows that was inserted into the anus to pump it full of smoke. It was thought that this warmed and stimulated them. The practice was actually invented by natives who of course had access to tobacco long before Europeans. They used it to treat gut pain, though I have no idea if it was actually effective at all. Okay. Still looking for a source. But this was a story I heard years ago and felt like it belonged here. When the X-ray was first invented and used on live patients, doctors noticed that internal organs appeared to sag when compared to the images they were given as a control. So major surgery was performed to open patients up and tie their organs back into place. This of course was often a fatal procedure. Later they figured out that the control images were all of cadavers laying on their back, while the live patients were X-rayed in standing positions. The cause of the organ sag? Gravity. In hindsight, bloodletting was pretty f***ed up. Basically they had a theory called for humors, which was on its own a fat sack of shit, which somehow got perverted into the idea that most medical problems can be resolved by taking lots of your blood out, either with leeches or just cutting you open. If the bloodletting didn't fix it, must still have too much blood. Take some more. Historically medicine has not been a strong area for humanity until relatively recently. This one is my favorite, because it just sounds like it should be correct. The ancient Grecians believed that there were the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. They had a natural order to them, and elements wanted to be with the rest of itself. So, if you held a rock in the air and let go, it would drop, bringing itself closer to the collection of earth. Water's place was slightly on top of earth, so rain fell from the air, or rose from the earth, wells, etc. Air was higher than both of those, so bubbles rose from out of water. Fire was the highest ordered element, and all the stars were specks of fire. When you lit a fire, it would reach up, and the sparks would climb into the heavens, where it would be closer to the collection of fire. It totally makes sense, if you know nothing, and seems like a pretty logical explanation for everything. Not so much scientists per se, but back around the Victorian era in England, the police and crown law viewed that if a woman was raped and became pregnant, she must have reached orgasm during, therefore meaning that she was in fact not raped and that she must have enjoyed it. The Victorians viewed the female orgasm as the key to conception. They were totally weirdly fixated on that. That being said, that was the late 1800s. You'd think that we'd have left the ridiculous concept of legitimate rape behind. But with what some US Republicans have been saying lately, this train of thought hasn't died off. Fucking terrifying. This thread terrifies me. I mean, we're looking at our ancestors and realizing how their views of the world were so f***ed up. But I can only imagine how our descendants will look upon us in 100 years and point out our false scientific beliefs. Will they look at us and say, I can't believe those ancient people believed that, insert current held scientific belief here, like how we look at our ancestors and say I can't believe that they thought that bloodletting was good medical practice? They probably will. And that scares the shit out of me, because we're probably so wrong about how we think the universe works.